Hey, my name is Lucas Miller. I'm 28, and as the youngest marketing director at Pinnacle Agency, a top-tier media conglomerate in New York, I've always prided myself on handling pressure like it's just another item on my to-do list. I've dealt with all kinds of bosses over the years, the paternal ones who pat you on the back while micromanaging every breath, the fake friendly types who smile through gritted teeth, and even the outright tyrants who thrive on making you squirm. But Victoria Winters, our CEO, is in a league of her own. She's the only person who can silence a room of 60 executives with a single arched eyebrow. With her sharp features, steel gray eyes that seem to pierce right through you, and her jet black hair always pulled into a severe bun, she commands respect, or fear depending on who you ask. She's built Pinnacle from a scrappy startup into a powerhouse, and she does it with an iron fist wrapped in a perfectly tailored black suit. That morning, I dragged myself into the office feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. The night before, I'd stayed up until nearly midnight revising the Henderson campaign pitch after Victoria's latest round of feedback. Her email had landed in my inbox at 11 p.m., demanding a complete overhaul of the strategy we'd spent 3 grueling weeks perfecting. No pleasantries, no acknowledgement of the team's effort, just a list of bullet points tearing it apart. I grabbed my usual black coffee from the lobby vendor, the steam rising in lazy curls as I rode the elevator up to the 22nd floor. The office was already buzzing, glass-walled conference rooms filled with early birds tapping away at laptops, the hum of printers in the background, and the faint scent of fresh bagels from the break room. But my mind was elsewhere, replaying her email over and over. I wasn't even halfway through my coffee when my phone buzzed with an urgent meeting invite. Conference room A now. No subject line, no agenda. Classic Victoria. I sighed, straightened my tie, and headed down the hall. The room was all sleek minimalism. A long glass table reflecting the city skyline outside, ergonomic chairs that cost more than my first car, and a massive screen dominating one wall. Victoria was already there, standing at the head of the table, her back to me as she stared at her laptop. She didn't turn around when I entered, but I could feel the tension radiating off her like heat from a radiator. "You're 5 minutes late, Lucas," she said without looking up. Her voice was clipped, precise, like a scalpel slicing through the air. I set my coffee down a bit harder than necessary, the thud echoing in the empty room. "Good morning to you too, Victoria." She finally turned, her gray eyes locking onto mine with that unyielding intensity. "The Henderson revisions need to be finalized by noon." I felt a spark of irritation ignite in my chest. "You mean the revisions you sent at 11 p.m. last night?" "Precisely. As marketing director, I assumed you could handle pivoting under tight deadlines." I leaned back in my chair, trying to keep my cool, but the words came out sharper than I intended. "My team hasn't had a real day off in a month. We're burning out, Victoria. You never ask how we're holding up. You just demand more." Her brow furrowed and she crossed her arms, the fabric of her suit jacket whispering against itself. "This company doesn't pay you to whine about your feelings. If you're too fragile for the pace, perhaps you're in the wrong role." That did it. The frustration I'd been bottling up for weeks, months really, exploded. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. "Fragile? You think you're the only one sacrificing here? We're all fighting for this company, but you act like we're disposable. Newsflash, we're not machines." The argument escalated from there, our voices bouncing off the glass walls. Outside, through the transparent panels, I could see colleagues pausing at their desks, pretending to work while stealing glances. The air in the room grew thick, almost suffocating, with the scent of her perfume, something crisp and floral, mixing with the bitterness of my cooling coffee. We went back and forth, me accusing her of being heartless, her firing back that I lacked the spine for leadership. It was a clash of egos, 2 strong-willed people who'd both built walls around their vulnerabilities. And then, without warning, she closed the distance between us. Her hand grabbed my shirt collar, pulling me forward, and before I could process it, her lips crashed into mine. It wasn't a gentle kiss, not the kind from movies with swelling music. It was raw, fueled by pent-up frustration and something deeper. Maybe anger, maybe desperation. Her mouth was warm, insistent, tasting faintly of mint from her gum, and for a split second, the world narrowed to just that. The press of her body against mine, the faint tremble in her grip, the way her breath hitched. My hands instinctively went to her waist, steadying us both as a rush of heat surged through me. Time stretched, the argument forgotten in that electric moment. When she pulled back, her eyes were wide, flushed with emotion, a rare crack in her icy facade. She grabbed her bag from the table, her movements jerky, and stormed out without a word. The door swung shut behind her, leaving me alone in the silence. I collapsed into my chair, heart pounding like a drum in my chest, my lips still tingling. What the hell had just happened? The office outside returned to its hum, but I knew nothing would be the same. Victoria didn't reappear that day. No emails, no calls, no sign of her at all. And as I sat there staring at the blank screen, a confusing mix of anger, humiliation, and an inexplicable pull toward her swirled in my mind. That kiss had shattered every boundary, and I had no idea how to pick up the pieces. That night, after the chaos in the conference room, I stumbled back to my apartment in Manhattan like a man who'd just survived a battlefield. The place was nothing fancy. A one-bedroom walk-up on the edge of the East Village with creaky hardwood floors, a tiny kitchenette that smelled faintly of last week's takeout, and a view of a brick wall across the alley. I dropped my bag by the door, the zipper scraping against the floor, and collapsed onto the worn leather couch. The city lights filtered through the blinds in thin stripes, casting shadows that danced with the occasional honk from the street below. I pulled out my laptop, intending to dive into the Henderson revisions, anything to distract myself from the replay looping in my head. The screen glowed harshly in the dim room, illuminating the scattered notes and coffee stains on my coffee table. But as I stared at the document, the words blurred. All I could see was Victoria's face inches from mine, her gray eyes flashing with something raw and unguarded just before her lips met mine. The kiss replayed in vivid detail, the unexpected warmth of her mouth, the way her fingers had tightened on my collar, pulling me in with a desperation that matched my own frustration. It wasn't passion in the romantic sense, it was a collision, like two storms finally breaking against each other. My heart had raced then, and it was racing now, a mix of anger, confusion, and something I couldn't name, something that made my skin tingle even hours later. I tossed the laptop aside and paced the room, the floorboards groaning under my feet. What the hell was that? Was it a power play, a momentary lapse? Or had I pushed her too far, cracking that impenetrable facade she'd built? And what about tomorrow? Would there be an HR email waiting, summoning me for a discussion about professional conduct? Would I walk in to find my desk cleared out, my access badge deactivated? Pinnacle wasn't just a job, it was my career. The ladder I'd climbed tooth and nail to reach the top rung at such a young age. Losing it over, whatever that was, felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. Sleep evaded me that night. I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazily overhead, its blades cutting through the humid air with a soft whir. The clock on my nightstand ticked forward relentlessly, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m. My mind raced through scenarios. Victoria firing me on the spot, or worse, ignoring the whole thing and letting the awkwardness fester like an open wound. By dawn, I was exhausted, but wired, the first light creeping through the window like an unwelcome intruder. I got to the office earlier than ever, before the usual rush of commuters flooded the lobby. The building was eerily quiet, the fluorescent lights humming overhead as I rode the elevator alone. My reflection in the mirrored walls looked haggard, dark circles under my eyes, shirt slightly rumpled from my restless night. I half expected a termination notice in my inbox, but when I logged in, there was nothing. No emails from HR, no urgent summons from the board, just the usual spam and a few follow-ups on minor projects. Victoria's status on Slack glowed green. Active now. But she hadn't messaged anyone, least of all me. It was as if the kiss had never happened, erased from the corporate ether. Around 10 a.m., I headed to the break room for a refill, the aroma of fresh brewed coffee pulling me in like a lifeline. As I turned the corner in the hallway, there she was. Victoria, striding toward me with her usual purposeful gait, but something was off. She wasn't in her signature black suit. Instead, she wore a simple white button-down shirt tucked into slim jeans, her hair loose and falling in soft waves over her shoulders. It made her look human, almost approachable. Our eyes met for a fleeting second, and I saw a flicker, something vulnerable, like a shadow crossing her face, before she averted her gaze and brushed past without a word. The scent of her perfume lingered, that same crisp floral note from yesterday stirring up the memory I'd tried to bury. I froze for a moment, my hand hovering over the coffee machine. What was that? Regret? Indifference? Or was she as thrown as I was? The rest of the morning dragged on in a haze of meetings and emails, but my focus was shot. Then, just before lunch, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Meet me on the rooftop at 1 o'clock. I knew it was her. The rooftop deck was a rarely used space on the top floor with potted plants wilting in the corners and a view of the Hudson River glittering under the midday sun. Wind whipped through as I pushed open the door, carrying the distant rumble of traffic from below. Victoria was already there, leaning against the railing, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her hair fluttered in the breeze, and for the first time, I noticed the faint lines of fatigue around her eyes. Lucas, she said, her voice steady but quieter than in the office. I don't want to apologize for yesterday, but I also don't want it to happen again. If you're not ready to face it. I leaned against the wall opposite her, the concrete cool against my back. Why do you have to be so cold to everyone all the time? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned to gaze at the city's skyline, the wind tugging at her shirt. After a long silence, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. My mother died when I was 10. Cancer. My father. He didn't know how to handle it. He buried himself in work, day and night. Never hugged me, never asked how I felt. He just expected me to be strong, to keep going. I learned early on that if I wanted to survive, I couldn't afford to be weak. Couldn't need anyone. I was stunned. This was Victoria Winters, the unbreakable CEO, laying bare her scars. She continued, her eyes glistening as she stared at the horizon. Control became my armor. It's how I built this company, how I protect myself. But meeting you, you've challenged that. You see through it and it terrifies me. You could hate me for it, but please don't pity me. I stepped closer, the gravel crunching under my shoes. I don't hate you. I'm just another lonely person trying to prove I'm worth something. Until now, I didn't know how to let anyone in either. In that moment, the walls between us cracked wide open. We stood there, inches apart but not touching, the wind swirling around us like a barrier we both knew was about to fall. The city noise faded into a distant hum, and I realized, if I walked away now, we'd never cross this bridge again. The air between us felt charged, fragile, like the calm before a storm we couldn't avoid. The days that followed turned Pinnacle into a place I barely recognized. It started subtly, like a chill creeping in before a storm. The morning after our rooftop conversation, I walked into the office with a knot in my stomach, the elevator dinging softly as it opened onto our floor. The usual bustle was there, the clatter of keyboards, the murmur of phone calls, the scent of fresh printer ink mixing with someone's microwaved lunch. But something felt off. Heads turned as I passed cubicles, eyes lingering a second too long before darting away. In the break room, where I'd normally grab a quick chat with the team over coffee, conversations hushed when I entered. Morning, I said to a group of designers huddled by the fridge. They nodded back, but it was curt, forced, like they were weighing every word. By midday, the whispers had solidified into something tangible. I overheard snippets in the hallway. No wonder Lucas gets all the prime projects. The Ice Queen thawing out? Who saw that coming? Must be nice to have that kind of leverage. They weren't directed at me, but they might as well have been shouted. The isolation hit hard. People I'd mentored, shared late-night deadlines with, now avoided eye contact in the elevator, pressing themselves against the walls as if proximity to me carried some invisible risk. During our weekly team huddle, the room fell silent when I spoke, not out of respect, but awkwardness. Ideas I'd pitched before were met with hesitant nods instead of the usual lively debate. It felt like I'd been marked, tainted by that one impulsive moment in the conference room. And it wasn't just me bearing the brunt. The rumors sliced at Victoria too, perhaps even deeper. She started appearing less in the open areas, no longer striding through the bullpen with her commanding presence, barking orders, or firing off quick approvals. Instead, she'd hole up in her corner office, the frosted glass door shut tight, blinds drawn against prying eyes. I'd catch glimpses of her through the slats, head bowed over her desk, fingers flying across her keyboard, or pacing with her phone pressed to her ear. A few times I spotted her slipping up to the rooftop alone, her silhouette against the skyline as she stared out over the city. She looked smaller up there, less like the unassailable CEO and more like someone carrying the weight of unspoken judgments. The tension built like pressure in a sealed bottle, and by evening, when the office had emptied out to just a skeleton crew of night owls, my phone buzzed on my desk. It was her. "Do you really hate me that much?" I stared at the screen, the blue light casting a glow on my hands. My thumbs hovered before I typed back, "Only during meetings, otherwise, I'm curious about the person behind the mask." Her response came after a pause that felt eternal. "I don't know how to care about someone without trying to control them." I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking softly, "And I don't know how to open up to anyone until this." That exchange cracked the door open. We started meeting outside the office, but always discreetly, not out of shame, but because we both knew the stakes. One photo, one overheard conversation, and the fragile thing budding between us could shatter under the scrutiny of board members, investors, or even the press. Our first real outing was to a small Italian bistro tucked away in a quiet side street of Little Italy, far from the flashy spots near Midtown where colleagues might spot us. The place was dimly lit with checkered tablecloths, candles flickering in Chianti bottles, and the rich aroma of garlic and tomato sauce wafting from the kitchen. Victoria arrived in a simple sundress, her hair down and loose, no makeup beyond a touch of lip gloss. Without her power suit, she seemed softer, more approachable, her gray eyes reflecting the warm glow of the lights. We sat in a corner booth, the hum of other diners providing a buffer of anonymity. Over plates of pasta, amatriciana, and glasses of red wine that tasted of dark cherries and oak, she opened up in ways I'd never imagined. "I used to escape into science fiction books as a kid," she said, twirling her fork absent-mindedly. "Worlds where logic ruled but emotions could still win. It was my way of hiding from the emptiness at home." Her voice was low, laced with a vulnerability that made my chest tighten. I shared, too, about growing up in a family where success was measured in promotions and paychecks, how I'd buried myself in work to avoid the hollow feeling of never quite measuring up. As the night wore on, the conversation flowed easier, punctuated by laughter that surprised us both. When the check came, I walked her to her car, parked a block away, the evening air cool against our skin, carrying the distant wail of a siren. At her door, I hesitated. "If I left Pinnacle, would you miss me?" She stopped, her hand on the handle, and looked at me with those piercing eyes. For a long moment, silence hung between us, broken only by the rustle of leaves in a nearby tree. "I wouldn't miss a talented employee," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'd miss someone who's become important to me." The words hit like a wave, washing away the last of my reservations. I reached out, my fingers brushing hers, then intertwining. Her hand was warm, steady, and for the first time, she didn't pull away. "You don't have to control everything," I said softly. "Sometimes it's okay to just let go." In that instant, under the dim streetlight, we crossed the threshold. What started as a clash of wills had evolved into something undeniable, a connection forged in shared scars and quiet confessions. But we both knew it had to stay hidden, at least for now, because the world outside wasn't ready for us. And neither were we, not fully. Yet, as I watched her drive away, taillights fading into the night, a spark of hope flickered in me. This wasn't just survival anymore, it was the beginning of something real, fragile, and worth fighting for. The storm hit on a Monday morning, the kind of crisp autumn day in New York where the air bites, just enough to remind you winter's coming. I arrived at the office early, as had become my habit since things with Victoria shifted. The lobby was alive with the usual rush, suits bustling through the turnstiles, the clang of coffee cups on marble counters, the faint whiff of rain-soaked umbrellas drying by the doors. But as I scanned my badge and stepped into the elevator, a sense of unease settled in my gut, heavier than the weekend's unresolved thoughts. My inbox was the first red flag. Amid the routine updates and vendor pitches sat an anonymous forward from HR CC'd to the entire executive team. The subject line was bland, regarding professional conduct, but the content was a gut punch. It detailed inappropriate relations between the CEO and the marketing director, listing dates, times, and even vague descriptions of our discreet meetings. The Italian bistro, a late-night walk near her apartment, whispers on the rooftop. No photos, no hard proof, but enough specifics to make it feel like we'd been watched. My hands went cold as I read it, the screen's glow reflecting in my widening eyes. Who sent this? A disgruntled employee? Someone who'd overheard too much? Or worse, a rival sniffing for weakness? By 9 a.m., the office had transformed into a pressure cooker. Whispers echoed through the open-plan space like wind through alleyways, colleagues glancing at me from their monitors, then quickly looking away when I met their gaze. The break room, usually a hub of casual chatter, fell silent as I poured my coffee, the machine's gurgle the only sound breaking the tension. One of my direct reports, a sharp analyst named Sarah, who'd always been straightforward, approached me in the hallway. "Lucas, is this real?" she asked, her voice low, eyes darting. I forced a neutral smile. "Focus on Henderson, we'll handle it." But inside, panic clawed at me. This wasn't just gossip, it was a torpedo aimed at our careers. Victoria was summoned to the boardroom first, a glass-enclosed fortress on the executive floor where decisions that shaped empires were made. I watched from afar as she walked in, her posture ramrod straight, black suit impeccable as always. But I caught the subtle tightness in her jaw, the way her fingers clenched her tablet a fraction too hard. My own meeting with HR came an hour later in a sterile conference room that smelled of lemon cleaner and stale air. Two reps sat across from me, notebooks open, expressions carefully blank. "We're investigating claims of favoritism and boundary violations," the lead said, her pen hovering. Questions poured out. When did it start? Any impact on decisions? Proof of coercion? I answered honestly but sparingly. No, it wasn't planned. No, it hadn't affected work. Yes, it was mutual. But each word felt like a nail in a coffin. The room's fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like accusations. The interrogation dragged on for nearly 2 hours, leaving me drained, my shirt clinging to my back from sweat. As I stepped out, the hallway seemed longer, the eyes of passing staff heavier. Rumors had spread like wildfire, some sympathetic, others gleeful, painting Victoria as the predator and me as the opportunist. By afternoon, a few team members requested transfers, citing uncomfortable dynamics. Partners emailed vague concerns about stability at the top. The board called an emergency session, and whispers of her resignation floated through the vents like smoke. That evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, casting long shadows across the rooftop deck, I met her there again. The wind was sharper now, carrying the metallic tang of impending rain from the Hudson. Victoria leaned on the railing, her hair whipping around her face, no longer the composed leader but a woman on the edge. "If they want me out, I'll go," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the gusts. I stepped closer, the gravel crunching under my shoes. "You can't resign because of me. Pinnacle is your life." She turned to face me, her gray eyes stormy. "It's not just about you, Lucas. I've hidden behind control for so long. If I run now, I'll never stop. But if stepping down means keeping what we have—" "No," I interrupted, my hand reaching for hers instinctively. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly. "We fight this. Together. You've built this place. Don't let shadows take it." She pulled back slightly but didn't let go. The board grilled me for hours. Questions about every decision involving you, every late-night email. They see bias where there isn't any. And the anonymous tip? It's like poison seeping in. We stood there, the city roaring below us, oblivious to our unraveling world. Rain began to patter on the deck, light at first, then steady, soaking through our clothes. I pulled her into an embrace, her head resting against my chest, the damp fabric of her shirt pressing against me. "We'll prove them wrong," I murmured into her hair, inhaling the faint floral scent that clung to her even in the downpour. "No favoritism, just Results. The next few days blurred into a gauntlet of meetings and scrutiny. The board demanded audits of recent campaigns, cross-referencing my involvement with outcomes. HR interviewed staff, probing for signs of discomfort. Victoria and I kept our distance at work. No shared lunches, no lingering glances. But the strain showed. She'd text me late at night. Can't sleep, wondering if it's worth it. I'd reply, it is. We're more than this job. Then, in a move that stunned everyone, Victoria called an all-hands meeting. The auditorium buzzed with tension, rows of chairs filled with wide-eyed employees, the air thick with anticipation and the scent of fresh coffee from the urns at the back. She stood at the podium, microphone in hand, her voice steady as she addressed the elephant in the room. Yes, Lucas and I are in a relationship. It started unexpectedly, but it's real. There has been no favoritism, no decision swayed by personal feelings. If anyone feels otherwise, my door's open, but I won't apologize for being human. The room erupted in murmurs, a mix of shock and reluctant admiration. In the following weeks, the fallout hit. A handful of staff resigned, citing eroded trust. A key partner paused negotiations, wary of instability. Emails flooded in from investors, questioning leadership. But slowly, as we delivered flawless results on Henderson, on time, under budget, with rave client feedback, the tide turned. No concrete evidence of wrongdoing emerged, just innuendo. The board backed off, satisfied with our transparency. Work stabilized, the whispers fading into background noise. Through it all, Victoria and I grew closer in the quiet moments. Stolen coffees on the rooftop, late walks in the rain-slicked streets. The crisis hadn't broken us. It had forged something stronger, a bond tested by fire. But as the dust settled, I knew the real battle was just beginning, proving to ourselves and the world that love and power could coexist without one devouring the other. Half a year later, life had settled into a rhythm that felt both unfamiliar and profoundly right. Victoria and I had moved in together, trading the high-rise isolation of our separate apartments for a cozy two-bedroom place near Central Park. It wasn't glamorous, no doorman or skyline views, but it had character. Exposed brick walls that glowed warm under string lights, a kitchen with a vintage stove that hissed when we cooked, and a bay window overlooking the park's leafy canopy. The air often carried the faint scent of fresh bread from the bakery downstairs, mingling with the earthy dampness of the park after rain. We'd furnished it piecemeal. A plush sectional where we'd collapse after long days, bookshelves crammed with her sci-fi novels and my marketing texts, and a small balcony where we'd sip coffee on crisp mornings, watching joggers weave through the paths below. Our days weren't picture perfect. They were real, messy, and laced with the kind of growth that comes from rubbing edges against each other. At Pinnacle, things had stabilized after the scandal. The board had backed off once the audits cleared us, and while a few whispers lingered in the hallways, our results spoke louder. Campaigns launching on time, client satisfaction soaring. Victoria still led with her signature precision, but there was a subtle shift. She'd pause in meetings to ask, "Team, how's everyone holding up?" It was small, but it humanized her, turning the ice queen into someone approachable, even admired anew. At home, though, we were just us. We'd argue. Oh, we'd argue. Over stupid things like who forgot to take out the trash, the lid clanging loudly in our tiny galley kitchen as one of us slammed it in frustration. Or bigger ones like work bleeding into our evenings, her pushing for perfection on a proposal I'd brought home, me snapping that we needed boundaries. "Lucas, if we don't nail this, the board will question everything again," she'd say, her voice edged with that old control. I'd retort, "And if we don't unplug, we'll burn out, just like before." But unlike our office clashes, these ended differently. No storming out, no icy silences. Instead, we'd cool off, her retreating to the balcony with a glass of wine, me pacing the living room. And then reconvene. "I'm sorry," she'd murmur, her hand finding mine. "I forget sometimes that it's okay to let go." I'd pull her close, feeling the tension melt from her shoulders, the warmth of her body against mine a reminder of how far we'd come. She'd learned to check in with me. "Rough day, you look tired," she'd say over breakfast, her fingers brushing my arm as she poured coffee, the steam rising in lazy spirals, and I'd learned patience. giving her space when she needed to process instead of jumping in to fix things. One evening, after a particularly grueling board call, she came home with takeout from our favorite Thai spot, the bags rustling as she set them on the counter. We ate on the couch, legs tangled under a blanket, the spicy aroma of Pad See Ew filling the room. "Thanks for not pushing earlier," she said softly, her head resting on my shoulder. I needed the quiet. It was in those moments that I saw her transformation most clearly, not the CEO, but the woman who dared to lower her guards. Winter arrived with a blanket of snow, turning the park into a white wonderland visible from our window. One snowy evening, we sat on the sofa, a fire crackling in the small hearth we'd installed, jazz playing low from the speakers, Miles Davis's trumpet weaving through the air like a gentle thread. Victoria leaned into me, her hair tickling my neck, the scent of her shampoo, something soft and vanilla, mingling with the wood smoke. "If I hadn't taken that risk back then," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the music, "I'd still be that isolated ice queen pushing everyone away." I chuckled lightly, my arm tightening around her. "And I'd still be the guy hiding behind spreadsheets, afraid to feel anything real." We sat in comfortable silence, the snowflakes drifting lazily outside, coating the world in quiet hush. Eventually, I broke it. "If you could go back, would you still choose that kiss, knowing all the chaos it unleashed?" She lifted her head, her gray eyes meeting mine, soft and unguarded in the firelight. Her hand found mine, fingers interlacing with a warmth that chased away the chill. "Every single time," she said, her voice steady, laced with conviction. "Because of you, because of who I've become with you. Stronger but softer, too." We didn't have a grand wedding, no splashy ceremony or social media announcements. That wasn't us. Instead, we chose each other daily, in the shared glances across the office during meetings, in the quiet dinners where we debriefed the day over wine, glasses clinking softly, in the weekends wandering Central Park, hand in hand, leaves crunching underfoot as we talked about dreams beyond boardrooms. Happiness wasn't flawless. There were still rough patches, like when old insecurities resurfaced during high-stakes pitches, or when exhaustion led to snapped words. But it was enough. Real enough to build a life on, to wake up each morning, knowing we'd face whatever came together. In the end, that impulsive kiss hadn't destroyed us. It had rebuilt us. From rivals locked in battle to partners navigating the world side by side. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, raw, resilient, and deeply true. And in a city that never sleeps, we'd found our peace,